Hello, everybody. Welcome. I'm Bob Blumenfield, your city council member. I represent you in Reseda, Winnetka, Canoga Park, Tarzana, and Woodland Hills. We're here today to discuss the cabin communities. And I wanted to just start by reminding us what's really at stake here. We're here because we are in a crisis that is defining our times. 4 to 5 people are dying on the streets every day. And just because this crisis is one that has been growing and boiling over time doesn't mean we can move slowly. In fact, that's been part of the problem. We have been moving too slowly as a city. And if we are going to get a handle on this, we've got to act swiftly and on all fronts. For years, the city focused almost exclusively on providing long-term housing. And while a lot of progress is made with Triple H and a lot of those houses are housing is starting to come online, too many people have been left on the streets waiting for this housing, and their conditions are worsening. People are dying, and homelessness is spiraling. Spurred by a federal lawsuit, as a city, we're moving and have moved to a model where we also seriously look now at transitional housing that gets people off the streets and stabilizes them, which makes it easier for them to get into the permanent housing options. I take this crisis very seriously, and toward that end have been pushing on all fronts. And in the last year, we've developed a whole range of housing and homelessness interventions, including permanent supportive housing. We stood up a new bridge home in Canoga Park, converted 2 hotels into homeless shelter, ultimately permanent housing, stood up new safe parking, and are about to open up 2 cabin communities. In total, more than 400 new beds in the 3rd district. Now, these cabin communities are meant to be temporary, but they are desperately needed. And there is no ideal place to put them. We can talk about how they ended up at these 2 locations, and I go into that extensively on the website, but know that these are being put up throughout the city. The 2 that we're talking about are in that first tranche, but there's going to be a lot more in residential areas and in non-residential areas, depending on where the land is available. The purpose of tonight's town hall is to help demystify what cabin communities are and what they are not. I know that there is a lot of fear, and I hear that from many of the neighbors who have talked to me about this issue and about these cabins, and people who have very real concerns. But my hope is that when you actually learn more about the cabin communities and what they really are, that a lot of that fear can dissipate, and that you'll recognize that having a cabin community in your area is not going to negatively impact your lives as many of you fear. We have with us Ken and Lori Kraft. They are the CEO and Chief Program Officer of Hope of the Valley, and they're going to be able to speak directly to how these cabin communities function and what they really are all about. Again, the cabins are meant to take local people who are currently suffering in your neighborhood and give them a place where they can get the services needed to transition out of homelessness. You know, when a person has no place to store their belongings and they walk on the street with a shopping cart. Cabin residents don't need to do that. They'll have storage for their belongings. When a person has no access to restrooms or showers or laundry, they stand out, and worse. Cabin residents will have access to these things. When people fear being victimized at night because they don't have shelter, they often resort to taking methamphetamines and other things to stay up all night. Well, cabin residents won't have that fear, and they'll actually be subject to a curfew, and they're going to have services to help move them forward. The majority of this town hall, I want to assure you, is going to be questions and answers. We're going to get to your questions, and that's how we're going to spend most of the time. But before we begin with that, I want to start by hearing from a Hope of the Valley employee who's going to tell us about her experience with homelessness and how interventions like this one helped her get back into housing and into recovery. So we're going to ask Melissa a couple of quick questions, and then we're going to move to Ken and Lori, and then to questions and answers. So Melissa, thank you for being here and being willing to share some of your own experience. And I know that this is difficult, but if you could maybe tell us a little bit about what led you to your homeless situation.
Well, I became homeless after my father passed away. He used to take care of me. used to be in a criminal lifestyle, and I went to prison a few times. And my dad had cancer. He wanted me to be his caretaker. So when he passed away, he left me some money, and me not being, not knowing how to manage money, I went through it, and I lost everything. I became homeless. You know, I didn't actually sleep on the street, but I slept in my car. I slept in a car for 2 years, and it's very uncomfortable. It's just as bad as it's just sleeping on the sidewalk. It was cold. I didn't have access to use the restroom when I needed to, or shower when I needed to. It's pretty bad out there, and it's very dangerous.
So what were some of the biggest challenges you faced while living on the street?
Well, not having access to, restroom, shower, to wash my clothes when I needed to heat up some food if I wanted to eat. The only thing I had in the car was a radio, let alone all my other stuff that I had in my car. But yeah, those were, the biggest ones.
And what helped you find your way out of homelessness ultimately?
Well, searching online, I found Hope at the Battle, and went there and, looked around and was able to take a shower, got a nice hot lunch. If I needed some clothes, I was able to go into the closet and get some clothes, whatever I needed, they had it. And they gave me hope. That they helped me, they gave me the tools and the resources that I needed to get back to my life. And now I work for Hope of the Battle, and I'm so honored.
Well, Melissa, thank you so much for sharing your story. I've heard your story, and I've heard a lot of folks similarly whose lives really get changed around, and have spent time at the North Hollywood cabin community, and the stories that you hear are amazing about folks who can have their lives turned around, who were previously living on the streets, but are finally have this hope and are able to move forward. So thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Ken and Lori Kraft regarding the general plan of operation for the cabin communities. And then we're going to get right into questions and answers. So Ken and Lori, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Councilman Blumenfield. I'm going to let Lori, who is our Chief Programs Officer, deal with more of the specifics of the program, which I think those are the concerns a lot of people have. And I just want everybody to know that we are deeply concerned about people that are housed and unhoused. And we realize that there are usually a lot of fears and concerns when something's new. Fortunately, we have been able to address those concerns, those fears. I am currently sitting right now at Alexandria Park, which is going to be the largest tiny home community in the state of California. And I'm here because I'm giving tours. And by the way, if anybody would like to come and see what one of these sites is like, you can come by anytime and see it. I'll be here the next 3 days giving tours. But I bring that up because there was a couple that was just here, and I gave them a tour. And she said, after the tour, she goes, I wrote a letter to my councilman. I was vehemently opposed to this because I had every reason why this would never work. She goes, I live right around the corner. She says, after seeing what is here, I was wrong. I am now a believer. I know this is going to work. And she's going to write another letter to the council member expressing her sincere support of what's going to happen. And so I live in the West Valley with my lovely wife, Lori. We care deeply about our communities. And I want to make sure that everybody is safe to the best of our ability and that people are receiving the best possible care. And we are in a humanitarian crisis right now of homelessness, and we must provide solutions and genuine care and compassion that are results oriented. And so I know there's a lot of questions about the how. And so Lori's going to start with answering some of the initial questions, and then I'll weigh in as well. But Lori, at this point, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and just address some of the questions that have been previously raised.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken. And thank you, Councilmember Blumenfield, for the opportunity to be here. Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to start by just going through some generalities of how the program will be operated. And then I guess we can jump into the questions after that. I know many people have questions. So I just want to start by explaining a couple things. So I've heard or had a lot of questions regarding who comes into the cabin community. And there is what we call a catchment zone. It's approximately a 3-mile radius around the cabin community. And there are currently outreach teams actively doing outreach, LA Family Housing and LAHSA, Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority outreach teams that are actively doing outreach in that catchment zone, working with the unhoused in your local community to see who is interested in coming inside, receiving a cabin, so that they can be kind of set on a path to stabilization. And those folks get a referral, and the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority vets them based on things such as vulnerability, an acuity score, which is really how chronic their homelessness is, how long they've been in the community, how long they've been living in your community. We receive those folks, they're put on a list, and then we coordinate an intake. Our staff the outreach staff does a warm handoff with our Hope of the Valley staff. Folks come in, and that's when we sit down and do an intake with them. This is an important process, the intake. It gives us a chance to get to know them and them us. We do go over guidelines. There are guidelines for the community. We do have a curfew that is clearly noted in the guidelines. Everybody has to be in by 10 o'clock p.m. And in until 6 o'clock in the morning. We do make exceptions if people have employment, and we do ask that they bring us something that we would be able to verify that they are in fact employed. So we go through other things such as, the drug and alcohol policy. This is a drug and alcohol free community. Do not allow drugs and alcohol inside. So our case managers and our team goes through those guidelines, and then we are assigned somebody a cabin. We do have security. That's part of the initial process of coming into a cabin. And it is a process that our residents will have to go through every single day, every time they go in and out. So we're going to have a minimum, we'll have 3 to 4 security guards at the site. At the intake point for the site, everybody will be wanded, and all their bags will be searched through as well, to ensure that we don't have anything coming into the community that shouldn't be inside. We also have security monitors, client services monitors, multiple client services monitors at a time throughout the day, throughout the evening, and all night long, who attend to residents' needs. They help serve the meals. They lock the cabins for people. They just attend to any needs that our residents would have. We have hygiene monitors that help keep the bathrooms clean. We have laundry services. So there are laundry machines so people can do their laundry. We have 3 hygiene trailers. I'm sorry, there won't be 3 at this site. There'll be probably 2. But at any rate, people have an opportunity to take a shower and, just be clean. What I'm trying to say is that we provide any and all services that the residents are going to need right there within the community. But maybe most important, we have a team of case managers and housing navigators that are going to be working with the residents who come in, because I do want to highlight that the people that come into the cabin community are people that have expressed interest in receiving assistance and help. They want help. And so our team will then work with them to help them obtain vital documentation. Everybody, it's a requirement that they have what we call a housing services plan. That plan is to set them on a path to that will lead them to eventually permanent housing. Because the ultimate goal of this program is for people to be permanently housed. I often get questions as far as people who have committed sex crimes and sex offenders. I'd like to address that by saying that our supportive services team, so our case management team, will be screening everybody who comes into the cabin to see if we do have anybody that is on the Megan's Law list. So everybody we check through Megan's Law. If in fact they are, then we adhere to what's called Jessica's Law, and that if the site has a school or anywhere where children would congregate within 2,000 feet of that location, we would make sure that that individual is not, we do not have them do an intake at our cabin community or at any of our programs if that's the case. Rather, we have them transferred to a location that is not near a school, a preschool, or anywhere where kids are going to be congregating. So again, you know, security is important to us. Safety is important to us. We want to be good neighbors as much as we can be. I also understand many of the concerns that you all have. We don't allow loitering. We ask that residents be inside of the property. If they're going to leave, that then they leave and they go do whatever they need to do. But it's important to us that you know, we're being good neighbors. So I think that's the general sort of overview that I was going to give. I want to leave plenty of time for the questions, so we can move into that if that's okay with you, Council Member.
Absolutely. No, that's the idea. We wanted really to spend the bulk of the time addressing questions and taking comments. And so toward that end, we'll move toward that section of the program. And just to let folks know, what we'll do is we'll do 2 questions, live questions, and then one will read a question that somebody has pre-submitted. So if you want to ask your question live, please raise your virtual hand, and we will call on people based on the order of which we see their hands. And then we'll, as I said, we'll intersperse the written questions that folks have either pre-submitted or are writing now. We're going to, in order to try to get as many people to speak and ask questions as possible before our 8 p.m. close time, we will limit folks to 1 minute. And Miriam will be timing you. And so when you hear that bell, please finish up, and then she's going to have to unfortunately cut you off if you keep going well beyond that. So also we're going to try to get through people and not have people ask a second question unless we get through all of the other questions. So we will note after you've asked your question. If you have another question, you can raise your hand again, but we're only going to call on you the second time if we can get through to you. So that being said, let's go to our first question. Appears to be from Rosalind Sweet. If you could unmute Rosalind Sweet, and we'll take her question. Rosalind.
Yes, hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. I was wondering, so how would you feel if these were outside of your home?
Okay, great question. Probably like you, I'd have some trepidation, have some concern. And I'll tell you, I had this kind of thing, a real experience in a similar way. Wasn't exactly in front of my house, but very, very close when the COVID crisis hit. We had, in the city, we stood up shelters in a number of different parks in the area. And as it works out, there was one park in my district that qualified, that had hot showers. And that was the one that is a short walk from my house. And yes, I had some concerns, but I was glad that people were getting off the streets and were there. I walked by that shelter every day with my dog. Similarly, I'm around the corner from one of the largest food banks, Prince of Peace Church, and I volunteer there at times to help them. So, and that draws a lot more homeless folks than certainly any of these cabins will, because the cabins are not going to be a draw for people. They're just, the folks who are living there are going to live there, but other folks are not allowed to come because other folks aren't going to get showers. They're not going to get services, unlike what's right near my house, where people do get showers, they do get services. So people come from all over to basically go right next to where I live to receive these services. So I hear your question, but the other thing I should say, and I know a lot of people like to personalize this is not about me. This is about getting homeless people out of harm's way and off the streets. And this is a district that is larger than most cities, and we are doing these interventions everywhere in the city. So while I appreciate the spirit of the question, know that I understand where you're coming from, and I appreciate that. So next question is Richard Posel. Could you please unmute Mr. Posel? Mr. Posel? If you could hit your unmute button, then we could hear you.
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Oh, great. I was wondering, what is inside of each cabin? What are if there's any kind of furnishings, or what does it consist of?
Great question. I'll give you the quick answer, and I'll let Ken and Lori add to it. But basically, there's 2 fold-down beds. They don't have to fold, you could have one. And there's some storage, an air conditioning unit, a heating unit, electric plugs for recharging. Ken or Lori, you want to add anything to that?
Just that they are 64 square feet. There are 4 windows for cross ventilation. There is a nighttime light, and the 2 electrical outlets are on both sides. They're designed for 2 people per unit. During the COVID crisis, the Department of Public Health has limited us to having 1 person per unit, unless they are a couple or unless they are related. Then you can have 2 per unit. But probably the most important component of these tiny homes is a front door that locks. And just the number, especially the number of women that are homeless on the streets that have been victimized, and for them to be able to come inside and lock their door and to be safe. And not just their unit is safe, but the actual, the community, and there's a single point of entry. There are security guards, as Lori mentioned. There is a 9-foot fence that surrounds the entire property. And there is video surveillance that we can see everything that's going on the inside. And particularly for the Reseda site, we're also going to put cameras on the outside. We want the community to feel safe. We will be able to see everything that is going on in and around the facility, and we will respond to anything that needs our attention.
Great. All right, now we just did 2 live questions. We'll do a written question. Veronica, would you read the first written question?
Absolutely. So the first pre-submitted question came from Sherry Luchette. Can you talk through a timeline of the cabin opening process for the surrounding community? What are the steps that lead to the grand opening? What can neighbors expect to see and hear during this process?
And I will turn to Ken and Lori for that.
And Lori, I mean, as far as I will say this, typically what we have done and what we're doing now is prior to the opening of one of the locations, we do have an open house. It is very important to us that this not be a black box where everyone's wondering what's going on inside of there. We want the community to come, to walk through it, to see firsthand exactly what's going to be happening. And hopefully by seeing it, it'll disarm some of those fears. And as far as typically what happens is once the city issues a certificate of occupancy for the site, which means it's passed all of the clearances from fire department, building and safety, all the various agencies, then typically we as the provider will have 2 weeks to make sure we can then install all of our surveillance cameras, to install our internet, to install our offices, and to get everything ready to go. And one of the things we've also done is we've asked the community to get involved, and we've had so many community members who've helped purchase the sheets, the blankets, the pillows, waste baskets, all the various components. And so that's the timeline. But right now, my understanding is, and Councilman, you might know better, but that they might have a certificate of occupancy the first week of May. And if they do, then you would figure 2 weeks after that.
Nope, that's exactly right. So mid-May is the goal, and depending on those particulars, we'll certainly make an announcement. Look on my social media and everything else to make sure that everybody knows exactly when it's going to open, so folks can be prepared. And as Ken said, ideally we're going to do, or we will do, a open houses and that kind of thing prior. Okay, let's go to the next question. Is from Janice Riddle. If you could unmute Janice Riddle, please.
Yes, thank you. I put several questions on the messenger site. However, and you talked about security, and Ken, now you've talked about security, that there will be a security person and there will be cameras and such. Is it okay if I just talk freehand for a moment? Just free,
Go ahead.
Can I do that?
Sure.
Okay.
You have
good.
1 minute.
Drove by the North Hollywood community a couple of days ago. We heard that there was a fire there. Couldn't get close to the North Hollywood community because of the location. Couldn't find how to get even near it, but saw it. And lastly, I was at the park today, and I put this in the comments, or whatever you call it. For the first time in over 5 years, I was uncomfortable. I go there several times a week with my dog. There were 2 men there hanging out at one of the park benches that was following my every move, and not that they were physically following me, but I knew that they were following me by their eyes. And I'm not, so I don't know what's going to happen when these people leave the community during the day. That park has been so important to me and to so many other people. And if it gets overrun by these people, that's my fear. That's my concern. And
What is your question? You have exceeded your time limit.
Are you talking about the Reseda Park? Is that the one you were in?
The Wilbur Park. Yeah, next to you.
Yeah. No, I got you. Obviously, you're talking, and thank you for your question. Obviously there are folks that are living in that park right now. And the goal is to get those folks out of that park and into a cabin community where they'll have a caseworker, where they're not going to have the need to hang out in the park, because they'll have their own home, a small 8x8. They'll have meals that are served, that are on site. They'll have the services on site. So my hope is that you'll feel safer in the park moving forward, because some of those very folks who are in the park will no longer have to be in the park. And that's the goal across the city, is to try to get all these folks who are in the streets right now, who are, sometimes they're in desperate situations, or that, I get complaints from neighbors in Reseda about people defecating in the alleys and that kind of thing. Well, they won't need to do that if they actually are in a cabin community where they have restrooms. But Ken and Lori, would you like to address that as well?
I would just like to say that we do have many people in our programs and in our shelters that are employed. And Hope of the Valley has a job center, and we have amazing employment specialists. And so we fully expect that there's going to be a number of people that will be in the cabin community that will be employed, and they'll be going to work. We will also do the best job that we can we can't be monitoring necessarily, the park all the time. But we are going to, again, write into our guidelines that, we're asking for our residents to be good neighbors. And, I don't believe that the park is going to necessarily turn into a hangout for all of the people that are in the cabin community. As I mentioned, they do have employment, many of them, and they also have many other things they need to do, especially working on their housing plans. But so those would be my comments on that.
And I would just say also on site, inside the cabin community, there is space for people to hang out. You'll find even like the existing sites we have, a lot of folks, they just don't leave the site. They stay on site, but a lot of them have severe physical disabilities, so they really can't leave. And others of them just feel safe. They don't want to leave. Now, other than the times that they are looking for work, they're taking care of their basic needs. It's not like all the folks that are in there all migrate to public spaces and create a problem. That's just not the case. To the contrary, they feel very comfortable staying on site, working with our case managers, our housing navigators, our mental health specialists, our substance abuse counselors, and our job specialists. It's a comprehensive program, and they have to keep working on this during the daytime, and then we do have curfews at night. So we have found it to be a great solution, and it actually helps to beautify and get people off the streets and the highways and the byways, and get them in a safe place.
Great. Our next question comes from Paula Silva. You could, and remember, anyone else, if you want to ask a question, please remember to raise your virtual hand. You can find your virtual hand in the lower part of your screen. It looks like a little hand. So, Paula.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi, thank you. My question is, like, having the school and preschool so close to the cabins, how safe our kids are? Because, the kids walk to the school, they start in school next week. I want to know how safe they're going to be there, and like how safe the preschool, like just steps away from them, are safe.
Ken and Laura, you want to?
I would say I would put my kids in the preschool without any hesitation. First of all, the one preschool I know that's close on Tarzana, we're intentionally putting the single point of entry at the furthest point away from the preschool, intentionally, just so that when people exit, they'll have to go to Reseda and not turn left on Topham, to go by the preschool. But again, I do think that there is a misnomer and a misunderstanding that somehow these folks are in the business of causing problems for other people. There might be people that are homeless that are doing that, but people that enter into this program, part of the criteria for them to enter into the program is that they have to want to end their homelessness, and they have to be willing to address the issues that are preventing them from being housed. And so, they're motivated, they're incentivized to want to end their homelessness. And so I really would not see that as a problem at all.
And there's a number of other interventions where this has not been a problem. The Willows, which is the Canoga Park Bridge Home, is literally 200 feet away from a school. Faith Baptist is 300 feet away from the Canoga Park Hotel that has been, and this is not proven to be a problem. As Ken was saying, the folks who are going into these cabins are going in because they need help. They're not going into these cabins because they're trying to cause trouble in the community. Just the opposite. They're trying to get their lives together. And my hope is that after this is up and running and folks actually see that you'll feel good about having this cabin community near you, and proud that you're helping to make a difference in many people's lives, because there'll be turnover. The people who are in these cabins will eventually transition into housing, and other folks will be able to take their place and go along that pathway. So I think that was 2. We'll move now to a written question. Veronica, could you read whatever the next written question is, please?
Absolutely. Next question is from Richard Rich. Why are shelters being built in Tarzana and Reseda and not downtown where they are more needed?
Great question. There actually are there's a lot more going in downtown than out in Tarzana and Reseda in the West Valley. In fact, often we get that question from folks in downtown saying, why do we have all the interventions down here and you have so little in the Valley and in the West Valley? And that's partly what we're trying to change, is to make sure that we do have some interventions in the West Valley, because we have homeless people in the West Valley. And it's been found time and time again that folks who are homeless or in a particular area are homeless because they have a connection to that area. And I can tell you, I go out, at least every other week to do outreach and I talk to the people who are homeless, and they're in the West Valley because they have a connection. They grew up here, or their spouse, a strange spouse, may be living there, or their kids who they may or may not have access to are there. And so they want to be in the West Valley. Most people from downtown don't want to come to the West Valley. It's too hot out here, et cetera. So you need to have interventions to serve the local people where they are homeless. And yes, we have these interventions coming in the West Valley, but there's a heck of a lot more going on downtown. And if you're following some of the legal cases with Judge Carter and the LA Alliance case, he's making a big push to do a tremendous amount to deal with the Skid Row population and to put even more interventions down there. And they're talking about interventions that are very different than, even having sanctioned encampments, meaning tents all in a large parking lot or something to that effect. This is very different than that. This is much more, organized and, a much better intervention certainly from my perspective, to have these cabins. So next question the next person with their hand up is Joe Macias. Can we unmute Joe? Joe, you appear to be unmuted. Can you hear us? Joe? Okay, we can try to come back to Joe, and the next person will unmute and we'll come back to Joe. Hopefully he can hear us. Next is Shuki Lahavi, and I apologize if I'm butchering your name. We're having a technical issue. Can we please unmute Suki?
Okay, yes. Thank you, council member. Can you hear me now?
We can. Thank you.
I appreciate you and the team providing such information. I was wondering if you could highlight the overall aspect of this program amongst other programs and initiatives, and towards a more holistic view of this problem. So my own perspective is how does this fit in with additional enforcement that you'll bring in? We're talking about those who are willing to get out of the horrible situation that they're in, but what about those who are comfortable being continuing living in RVs? And I know that enforcement has always been a problem. I personally have been working with your office for over a year now, just to put a few signs of no parking in the street, and response and enforcement has been a challenge before and during and after COVID. And so I'm trying to understand how this solution helps solve the overall problem, and where does it fit in the overall problem, especially with those who will not accept this solution.
Right. A great question. And homelessness is, as you said, is a very large issue, and there's so many different facets. And most importantly is getting people help, and getting people who want help, the help that they need to get out of homelessness. And that requires having housing and having shelter. And as I started off at the beginning of this, when I talked about, the most important, the best solutions are those permanent supportive housing and long-term housing, but we have to have these transitional solutions for while people are waiting for these better solutions. So that's why we're pursuing the whole gamut of solutions that run. And as I went through at the beginning, even in my district, we're doing everything from transitional to permanent supportive housing, to hotel conversions, to bridge home, all of it. We are throwing everything that we possibly can at the problem to create opportunities. But as you say, part of it is also then what do you do in the situations if somebody doesn't want housing? And that is a real issue. I mean, we need to help people who may not want the help themselves. I was talking to a gentleman, tragic situation a couple of weeks ago. A gentleman died in my district, and I had talked to him 2 days earlier, and he actually had he had been at the Willows, but he didn't want to stay there, and so he was on the street, and I was asking him, saying, "You had the golden ticket. Why didn't you stay there?" And he was basically saying, "It's my right to be on the street." And meanwhile, he had, a needle behind his ear, like you would have a pencil, and he had a couple of bottles in front of him, and he was clearly in bad shape, and he was sick. And even though under the state's definition, he couldn't get a conservatorship, he should have, he's the kind of person that we need to just find treatment for. We need to get some of those state laws liberalized a little bit, so that someone who's literally killing themselves in front of us, just because they're not an immediate threat to someone, can get that kind of a service. But your question is also about how do you maintain the streets? And I have been trying, as you know, to get certain laws passed that will allow us to have to keep our streets clean and safe and passable, especially as we're able to get more housing. And the two are linked, because you can't expect someone to not be on the street if you don't have a housing option for them. As the courts have found, and rightfully so, they have in many times, they have taken a lot of the laws that have been on the city books and they've invalidated them. It used to be you were not allowed to dwell in your vehicle. The court said that was unconstitutional. There were a number of different things like this where the courts have basically said, unless you have housing, you cannot enforce these laws. So once we get the housing, we'll actually be able to enforce some of these laws per the Boise case and per some of these other cases that are out there, so that we can say to someone, hey, if you're not going to accept shelter, you can't be blocking the underpass, or something to that effect. And that has to be part and parcel of it. There was a motion that I was involved with, where 6 different other council members were involved to try to get 4118 and 5611, which are the municipal codes dealing with storage of belongings and laying and sleeping on the street, to try to get that updated. It was sent back to committee, and I expect that to come back to the council probably in the next month or two, with some additions to it, to try to get a little bit more ability for the city to maintain its streets. And part of this also relates to the Judge Carter case. The judge has been very clear about saying he wants both to get the city and the county to offer the housing and the services, but he also wants us, like every other city, to be able to have laws on the books that allow us to maintain our streets. I'm a big believer that everyone has a right to housing, to a roof over their head, but they don't necessarily have a right to any old park bench. Our parks are some of our right-of-ways. They're there to serve everyone, not to be privatized. We have people living in dugouts of a baseball diamond, and that's not right for a lot of reasons. So my hope is that these things can be worked out, but they are definitely related. Was that 2? And then we'll go to the next written question. Veronica, would you like to read the next written question?
Sure. Next question comes from Lynn Johnson. How exactly will the needs of residents struggling with mental health issues or drug addiction be addressed on site?
I can answer that question. So we do work very closely with the Department of Mental Health. Our case managers, our team, will be connecting those people who do have mental health needs to the Department of Mental Health. And then for those that have substance use disorders, we work very closely with Tarzana treatment centers. We also plan to bring in AA panels and NA panels. And so for anybody who is struggling with an addiction and wants to get clean and sober, we can definitely facilitate that. That's actually both of those, mental health and addiction, are priorities for us in terms of making sure that we have the linkage and the services available for people who need them.
Okay. Joe Macias, we're going to try you again. You had asked it and we had a technical issue. Let's see if you can speak now. Are you able to unmute yourself? Okay, if not, we'll go to the next person on the list with their hand up, which was Jamie York.
Hi, my name's Jamie York. I'm really glad that you mentioned permanent supportive housing because I kind of have a bone to pick with this. A couple years ago, you signed the United Way's 222 pledge, and it's not lost on me that CD3 and CD12 were in last place on fulfilling that pledge. Each council district committed to doing 222 units of supported housing. I believe we only did 53 or 54, but that 222 was actually only a representation of 1/3 of what was needed. So really you only did 8% of what our council district needed. My feeling is that the cabin community is the direct result of your failure to build permanent supportive housing. And honestly, the thing that works the best is permanent supportive housing. So I want to know what your plans are for building permanent supportive housing. And I want to know why our district was in last place in that goal when other districts did over 100% of their goal. Thank you very much for having this town hall.
Great, and great question. First, you should know that I approved as a council person every single project for permanent supportive housing that came my way. As a council member, I'm not a developer. I don't get to build the housing. There were some districts, the 222 pledge, as you call it, that was something the council not pledged to build, but a pledge to be approving all the units that came in, and certainly which is what I did. Some districts, as you may know, with the day the pledge, that was in, they already had those units up because there was already the process going. We've actually gotten, even since then, a number, we had a lot more than 54. I can get you the exact number. But we even had, permanent supportive housing before that ever took place. I had been instrumental in getting the Winnetka Village up and running. I'm a big believer in permanent supportive housing. We have Palm Vista, which just was approved, which has 91 units. And the permanent supportive housing that we got in my district required a lot of handholding, unlike in other districts where they just, all they had to do was not say no. Like we got the units over by the Reseda Theater, had to invest $1 million of CRA money to make that happen. So it took a lot more because folks were just not building in the West Valley, and we were begging folks to do that. We have the Bell Creek one coming as well, which is another 40 units. I'm all about trying to get more permanent supportive housing, and certainly in the 2 hotels that we just got turning into Project Home Key are also ultimately going to be permanent supportive housing. So the cabin communities, you could say, I don't know that it's a direct result, but it is, we need the transitional housing as well as the permanent supportive housing, because we have the Triple H money, and it's all been accounted for in terms of projects that is going, but it takes a long time, unfortunately, for those projects to come online. But at the end of the day, I think people do appreciate the shelter. I know Ken could address that as well, that this type of shelter is a necessary part of the entire spectrum of solutions that we need to have.
If I may, I'm just going to chime in, because the continuum of care, I think anybody that's at least addressing these issues right now, between myself, Lori, and Councilman Blumenfield, we all would agree the ultimate solution is permanent and permanent supportive housing. That's what we want. I mean, we are a housing first believer, but the challenge is when you live in a city where the average apartment, 1-bedroom apartment, costs $2,100. And then the first units that came online after Triple H were between $500,000 and $700,000 per unit. And then you had a lot of community resistance and trying to get them built. Meanwhile, and I've been part of the homeless count, every year, they kept going up double digits. They were going up double digits, but then we weren't getting the permanent supportive housing built. So, on the one hand, what do? Do you say, okay, you know what? Everyone that's homeless and that's newly homeless, just continue to wait on the streets until we get the permanent housing built? Or it's not either or, but it's yes and. And I think that's really what this particular project is with the tiny homes. And one of the benefits of the tiny homes or the cabin communities versus the congregant sites is that, in the congregant sites, you have, a lot of people under one roof. But in these cabin communities, there is the possibility for couples to be together and for people that are related to be together. And it just, for many people, it really seems to work well. Not only do we have our lists full, we have waiting lists of people to get into the cabin communities.
Great. All right, next question is, all right, actually, we're on a written question now. Veronica, could you read the next written question, please?
Absolutely. Next question comes from Jeff Mausner. Could you please talk about accommodations that will be made for pets?
Sure, and I'll let Ken and Lori talk about that, but one of the things that we've found is that oftentimes one of the barriers to getting people into shelter is their pets, because people, understandably, they've been living on the streets and their best friend or their companion is their pet. So we've really made a push to have a lot of these interventions, as many as possible, allow for pets, and that includes the bridge home as well as the 2 cabin communities. But Ken or Lori, would you like to address that?
I'll just say that we love our pets at our shelters. So we absolutely welcome pets and will welcome them at the cabin community. There is going to be a little dog run. So pets or dogs can relieve themselves, and Hope of the Valley works with various different animal rescue organizations. We're able to provide veterinary care as well as various different, pet sort of supplies that people would need as well. As the council member just said, we know that people's pets are very, very important to them. Our dogs are important to us, and not being able to accept them would be a barrier to entry. And so pets are very much welcome.
Okay, great. Next, we have a hand up is Carol Shadrow.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. First of all, I want to applaud and thank you for your efforts, all of you. You're really trying to move things along, so a heartfelt thank you. My question is not pre-planned, so I know I'm not going to sound PC, but I want to kind of I want to come from a different perspective. I really feel for the homeless, but I feel more for our city of over 10 million residents and how we have really lost our city. It has become something, it's called streets of shame, our streets of shame. And I think that there's just millions of us that are working, putting into the system. We work hard, we work many hours, and we try to do the right thing. And we've been fortunate. We haven't had the system fall from under our feet. And I feel just like, not how did we get here, but like, why are we letting it happen? It's just such a shame. And we are considered the 7th largest economy in the world. And it's just heartbreaking to see our city in this condition. So I just kind of wanted to see what you have to say about that. But I do really applaud all of your effort and hard work.
Thank you. And I very much appreciate that question. And it's important to know, this is not just a problem in Los Angeles. I mean, this is a regional and statewide problem. That's actually nationwide. And there's lots of factors that go into it. So, from the widening gap of income, housing affordability, the presence of, ubiquitous nature of some cheap drugs and methamphetamines. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and it is tragic. And we need to figure out, how do we interrupt the cycle that is causing an increase in homelessness? I mean, the numbers of people that are falling into homelessness, it's about 227 people fall into homelessness every day, and 220 people are basically transitioning out just in Los Angeles. So that's why we're losing ground. but even though we're doing more and more than we've ever done before as a city, you've heard the mayor's budget speech. He's talking about $1 billion this year that the city is going to invest. And we need to do even more and try to prevent, evictions and a lot of the damage that's coming from COVID, from creating an even greater homelessness crisis. So your comment was, how did we, I guess your comment wasn't how did we get here, but just, what about everybody else to some extent? And we're all in this together. And when someone is suffering on the street and we have this, this quality of life, it doesn't just affect that person, but it affects all of us and our conscience. As a parent, when I'm with my kids in the car and we're driving through an underpass and we see people suffering, it's heartbreaking. And I don't want, what is the message that we're sending to our kids that we allow folks to be on the streets and living like that? That's why, I'm certainly devoted to doing everything I can to create these options to get people off the streets, and to get them into safety and into a better life. So I apologize, I might have gotten a little lost in your question, but it's just, this is a big issue. And a big part of it is also not, the city has a role, but the county has a role as well. The county deals with all the mental health and drug addiction issues. The city doesn't even have a health department. We depend completely on the county for that. And you talk about the receivership issues, that's all on the state. And then you look at some of the federal funds that have been lost over the years when it comes to housing and the state funding, like the CRA, Affordable Housing Trust Fund, that was lost when the CRAs were eliminated. There are a lot of factors, but there's a lot of things that we need, and we need more landlords to take Section 8. We need more of homeless interventions. We need to do more about income inequality. We need to do more things like we're trying to do guaranteed basic income as an experiment in the city. We need to do all of these things to get us, on track in the 21st century, as we deal with some of the other complex issues of automation and everything else that is going to make it difficult for people to thrive and survive. I don't know if Ken or Lori, you want to add to that? Otherwise, we'll go to the next question.
I would just add, Councilmember, that the situation that we're in right now with this really humanitarian crisis of homelessness that we see in our city didn't happen overnight. It's been many years in the making. And, I worked for a long time at our Access Center. And one of the most frustrating things for me as a service provider was just a year ago. It was just a year ago that people would come in to that center and we were able to provide a meal, we were able to provide a shower. But when it came to a shelter bed, more often than not, we would have to say, I'm sorry, we just don't really have beds in the San Fernando Valley. And it was heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking to tell somebody who desperately needs a place to sleep for the night that we don't have an option for them. And so today there are hundreds of beds online and shelter beds available in the San Fernando Valley, and CD3 is adding more, and I'm so excited about that. So yes, it's a huge problem. It is a crisis. But I'm hopeful that we're gaining some ground and there's movement. And so I try to focus on that, and I hope we can all, focus on that as well.
Great. Okay, next we have Chanel Grandison. We could unmute Chanel.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. I wrote in a couple of them, but I think you guys have already answered those, so thank you very much. But what kind of guidelines would you have for a person that, because it looks like you guys did a lot of vetting to get the people in there and get the right resources and everything for them. But what if one of the occupants actually does something? Like I live in Reseda and I live like right across the street from the Wilbert Park. So the community cabinets are kind of catty-corner to my condos. And there's like a big, huge playground for the kids and stuff like that. So I know you said that, anybody that is on, that had any kind of issue with children or anything like that would not be, I would assume they would not be in this cabin right here because
Correct.
the park and the playground. But
Yes.
what discipline actions do you guys have if somebody breaks one of your rules? Are they evicted? Are they,
Great question. I'll let Ken and Lori answer that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We try to work with participants when there are behavioral issues. So it really depends on what happened, what kind of incident happened or what's occurring. For more, minor things, we would put somebody on what we call an improvement plan, and our team would work with them. And we've done this many times in many shelters, and it actually works. Remember, we have people, they're coming in out of encampments and off of the streets. And sometimes it takes a minute to get used to, new guidelines and being inside and et cetera, et cetera. If it's a serious offense, if, something illegal happens or, the LAPD is involved or something like that, there are situations where, yes, we do exit from the program. So it just depends on what's taking place.
And let me also add that we also realize that the cabin community may not be the perfect fit for everybody. So there's times also where we'll realize, this person, they're struggling at this site. And then we'll actually then transfer them to another site, or maybe they need more of an emergency shelter. And so we have the emergency shelter that we can transfer them to. But ultimately, if somebody is asked to leave, we don't want them around the facility there. So we will try to take them back to where they came from. And that's the best that we can do on that.
Okay, next we have a written question. Veronica, could you read the next written question, please?
Of course. So this is combining several that have been submitted by multiple people. The first is, how long are these cabins going to be at this site? And similarly, are residents only allowed to stay for 90 days? What happens at the end of these 90 days?
Okay, I'll start with the first part of that and then turn it to Ken and Lori, which is the contract with Hope of the Valley is for 3 years. It's possible that contract could get extended if things are going well. And it's also possible if people's fears are realized and it's not going well, that we could close it down earlier. But we're gonna give it the shot, and it's so far we've seen very positive results, and we want this to succeed. We desperately want this to succeed, but we need to be eyes wide open. And that's where it's unlike a lot of the other interventions, like our bridge home, where we have a 25-year contract, which is a big facility building, or some of the other ones, like we have the hotel conversions, and those are meant to be permanent. This is meant to be temporary. This is meant, we have a range of solutions, and these types of solutions are meant to be short-term, so that we can try to stabilize the direction that homelessness is going, but then ultimately rely more on the bridge homes and some of those other solutions. Ken, Lori, do you want to take the other part about the 90 days?
Well, I'll chime in first that there is not a limited time that somebody can stay there. As long as that individual is working their case plan, they're following the instructions of their case manager, they're applying for their state ID, they've applied for their birth certificate, they've applied for the Social Security card. We're helping them set certain appointments, maybe with mental health, and they're working their case plan. And then, they're applying for a job, they're looking for, that place to live, they're working with the housing navigator. Some people we found, we can actually end their homelessness really quick. Maybe through family reunification. So when we start working with clients, and all of a sudden we call their family, and the family's like, oh my gosh, we haven't heard from them in so long. We link them back together, and they want to be reunited. we actually have a foundation that will pay for the transportation to get somebody back to their family. So sometimes that's a quick solution, and we've been able to solve that situation. Others, it takes longer. Maybe they do have a severe mental disability, a physical disability, and it's just harder to get them, linked to the public benefit, and then maybe finding that right solution. But what we have found pre-COVID is typically between 4 and 6 months. If they're working their case plan and our team is doing what they're supposed to be doing, within a 4 to 6 month period, we're typically able to move them from the interim housing into permanent housing. We remind people as soon as they come on site, listen, we want this to be a great place of rest, a refuge for you, but this is not your final home. Okay, this is interim housing, this is bridge housing, this is transitional housing, and the goal is to get you to that permanent housing. So again, usually between 4 to 6 months, but we're not kicking somebody out if they haven't been able to resolve their issues in that amount of time.
Great. I'll mention at the Willows, where the bridge home is, even though it just opened up, we've already had a couple of people transition into permanent housing, which has been exciting. Next question is coming from Mahnaz Mubashir. Mahnaz, if we could unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you for letting me to speak. My concern is, first of all, I want to say there is no doubt that we are all in this together and we have to help. It's everybody's responsibility to take care of this. But from the other side, I just want to make sure that we are fair enough to, when we are doing like the planning for our city, we consider every, part of the city to have this responsibility. So I would like to ask you, is it possible to provide us with a map of the city that shows where are these locations? So for us to make sure, to feel better that yes, we are all treated the same.
Great question. And I agree with you, and I'm committed that every community needs to do its part. And every community in my district and every community around the city. So we are working, we can get you, certainly all of the first round of cabinet communities are already very much known. So we can point out exactly where all of those are on a map and put together a map for you of the first round. There are going to be more of these cabinet communities coming in the second and third round as we go. So you'll see, like right now, I think there's 2 or 3 of them in North Hollywood. There's one in San Pedro. There's one in Tarzana. There's one in Reseda. And then the next round, you'll keep seeing it in more and more communities. And you'll see different kinds of interventions in all of these different communities as well. But that's a great question. And all of this is public information. There's no, when it comes to the city, there's no hiding where these things are and where intervention, how the money is spent and where it's going. So definitely we'll work with you to get you all that information. Unless either of you want to add something, I'll move to the next question, which is from Poonam Dhillon.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Hi. So my question is specific to the Tarzana Cabin community to be located on Topham Street. I looked at the map. Presently, the gate is in the middle of that location, the parking lot. And we had conversation on this topic, and we were told that, it could be moved a little bit to the left, like the entry, like more towards Reseda, instead of moving it closer to where the school is. Is that happening? Did anything happen to that? Any follow-up on that conversation we had a couple of weeks ago?
Sure. And by the conversation, just so you know, Poonam's part of a group. We have for both cabin communities, we've set up a cabin community committee made up of of neighbors and stakeholders in the immediate areas. And so each of these groups we meet with regularly, at least once a month, and we talk about issues of how we can engage the community and how we can improve the cabin communities. And the Tarzana group has come up with a lot of great solutions. In fact, we've been able to, based on the requests of that committee, get additional lighting along Yolanda and along Topham approved. Some of that's already up. We're able to also, some of the suggestions were to change the fence from a standard fence with a color to having a fake hedge on it. That was done. So numbers of things like that are done because the community, and I want to thank you for being part of the cabin community, are part of it. Specific to your question, I know that Veronica is working on that, and probably at the next cabin community we'll have an update on that. Don't have the answer specifically. I know Ken had talked about making sure that as people exit the cabin community, they go right instead of left. Meaning when someone exits, they head toward Reseda and they don't head left toward where Discovery School is and toward where those residences are. And that is something that they have said they can do for sure. And then in terms of the physical change to where the gate is, Veronica's working on that, and I'm pretty sure by the next cabin committee meeting we'll have a better answer on that. And Ken and Lori, you want to add to that? No. Okay. So then the next question is from Evelyn Alamont.
Hi, council member. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, very good. It took me a while to get in. I know that there is great need throughout the city of Los Angeles. But about a couple of years ago, we had a homeless individual. It was a woman, and she was on the corner of Tampa and Victory. And anyone who lives in Reseda, about a couple of blocks away from your office, may have seen her. And we couldn't get her house. My neighbors and I kept calling LASA. Couldn't go within a few feet of her because she was so badly soiled, and she had severe mental illness. Clearly she didn't want to leave the area because her family's here. So I agree with everything you've said, the whole group has said here. How do we ensure that our local homeless population from Reseda will have access to the tiny cabin community, given that there's so much need within the city of Los Angeles? What's the process to make sure that our local homeless are getting, I guess you can say, the first opportunity to get into the cabin community?
Great question. And yeah, that is the whole design of this program, is to serve the local population. And we've made it, they've created what's called a catchment zone. And basically it prioritizes only people who are in the district. And it basically starts by doing concentric circles around the cabin community, so that the priority goes to the folks who are closest to it. And then also based on vulnerability. And that's per the judge's order was that we need to focus on the most vulnerable, which makes sense as well. So that's, Ken and Laura, if you want to add to that, because you guys are more intimate with that, but that was the blueprint, and that is the charge. But do you want to add to that?
That's exactly right. I would just, echo what you said, council member. So the goal really is to get those people that are in the catchment zone into the cabin community first. And we want to house the unhoused in your local community. Regarding the woman that was mentioned with the severe mental health, I know we all see this. It's can be really difficult, and those are hard cases. We work very closely with DMH's home team. They're an amazing team of men and women who do outreach for DMH. I would say that if you're not aware, you can put in an LA HOP request. It's LA-HOP. If you know of somebody specifically who is experiencing homelessness, they stay in the same area, you can go on that website. You actually will be able to kind of pinpoint and write some details about that individual, so that an outreach team can go right to where they are and meet with them and see if they can start working with them. So that's LASA outreach teams, LA Family Housing outreach teams, the DMH outreach team. So that's always an option if you see somebody that's struggling like that on the streets.
And let me also, just as a reminder, that someone who's homeless will not just walk up to the shelter and say, I'm homeless, I need a bed. That's not how it works. Okay. The only way that people are able to gain access into the cabin community is through an outreach and engagement team. And they're out there every week. They're talking to people. They know where the encampments are. They know where people are staying. And then they're the ones that are then making that referral. They've done the assessment out in the field and determined this is a good fit for this program. And then they do that soft handoff to our staff.
And I should also say, if there's someone in particular that you know of who's homeless, who you think is a good candidate, who is local, make sure you let us know, and we will make sure we let LASA know, for this initial surge as they look to get folks into these units. We want to make sure that they're aware of folks. So because they go to the catchment zone, they look around, but if you know somebody who's kind of hidden, but you think they would be a really good fit, please this is a good time to let us know about that, so we can make sure that they get seen by the right folks. Okay, next let's go to a written question. Veronica, if you could read the next written question.
Sure. We have several from Anthony Bianco. How much will it cost to open and operate these sites, and what is being done to reduce these costs?
Great question. And there was an article in the paper that talked about, I get frustrated with the costs of all sorts of things in the city. It's the city has to do everything not only by the book, but beyond that. And it's been frustrating because the costs have been a little bit high. There was an article in the LA Times that talked about these costs being up to $100,000. Well, the actual units themselves only cost $5,000. And I was really pushing. I said, look, we have to bring those costs way down. And in our area, we're able to bring them down substantially by by asking a lot of questions and getting some things removed. Like one of the big costs that they had initially was having to put all of the cabins on a raised concrete platform, which they did in some sites where they're doing grading. Well, they don't need to do that in our parking lots, because our parking lots don't need that kind of grading. The other drivers for some of the costs is not just the cabins themselves, but all of the electrical, sewer, et cetera, that go into making these cabin communities work. The perimeter fencing, the guard shack, the service provider area, the picnic benches, the dog run, the laundry facility, all of that, which is on site, all of that gets folded into the per unit costs. Now the costs are coming down as the city gets more experience building these and working to get them done. Things like improving the fire alarm system. That was one that really made me pull my hair out, because originally the fire marshal was insisting that each area have to spend like 1.5 million on a fire alarm in order to get all of the units linked. When you can clearly put a smoke detector up for $10 a pop, and there must be something in between $10 and 1.5 million that could be safe and effective. So those kinds of things are being worked out. There's still, obviously, these are much cheaper than other types of interventions. Contractors do this job. The city goes with a low bid to get the most competitive price. But I agree that we need to do everything we can to continually push the costs down. But at the same time, we don't want to shave off costs that improve the quality of life for the community within the cabins and the community outside of the cabins. A lot of the things that the people have asked for, the cameras, the lighting, they're all important. We need to have those as part of the overall cabin community in order to make it successful. Okay, let's go to the next question from Raymond Blatt. We can unmute Raymond. Remember, anybody who wants to ask a question, raise your virtual hand. Raymond, can you hear us? I see that you're unmuted, but we don't hear you. Raymond?
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, perfect.
Thank you, Councilman and members. My name is Ray Blatt. With me is my wife, Barbara. We each have a question. You made reference to a plan, long-term, 3 years. Is that still the goal? And then what?
Ken or Lori, do you want to answer that?
You're saying the plan. Well,
I think you're saying what you're saying because it's a contract for 3 years. What happens next? Is that your question?
That's correct.
Okay.
Right thereafter.
Yeah. So the hope is that we're getting, as we get these, the transitional housing options, we want to ultimately push really toward the permanent supportive housing, the affordable housing, the rapid rehousing, the bridge homes. Those are more longer term, longer lasting solutions. But right now we're in crisis mode, and we need to do everything we can to get people off the streets, including, in other cities, they've already started doing sanctioned encampments, meaning they just take a big parking lot and they say, put your tents here, and they put some porta potties up, and that's better than being on the street. In fact, Judge Carter, who's, you may have read about, has a federal injunction and everything else. He wants us to do that all over the city. And so the idea is we have to do the transitional stuff as well as the longer term stuff. But the idea is that once we stabilize, we'll be able to start pulling back on the transitional things, like starting with the tent encampments would be the first thing I would want to change if we end up having those in the city, because those are just a step above actual encampments, having an organized encampment. And then a cabin community is several steps above that. But I'd like us to get to a point in the city where we can get people rapidly rehoused without having to go through this transitional step. So the idea is to have enough of these transitions that are short term that we can then move into that second phase where we're able to move people directly to rapid rehousing and that kind of thing. But we're going to have to evaluate the cabin community in 3 years and see how it's working and that kind of thing, and whether it needs to be extended for a period of time. We'll have to cross that bridge when we get to it. But the idea is this is meant to be temporary. This is an emergency measure that we're putting in place because we're in a crisis and people are dying. Okay. Next question is coming from Wes Dunn. Unless, did we finish on the last person? Okay, Mr. or Miss Wes Dunn, if you could unmute.
Yeah, that's me. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, first off, thank you, Councilman, for putting on this, and as well for the crafts. Thank you guys for what you both do and what your organization does. We've actually partnered with you on a couple different projects here in the Valley. I'm the lead pastor of a church called The House. And so thank you guys so much for what you guys have done. My question would be, because some of the people that are part of our church and some of our neighbors have asked the question, hey, how do we make sure that this doesn't get out of control? How do we make sure that it doesn't, because we all drive underneath, underneath a bridge, and you see kind of something grow and it kind of spills out into the streets and it becomes a hazard to the community. How do we make sure that, number one, our compassion doesn't kind of overflood into the streets, where it goes beyond these sites? And then the second part of that is, if we're doing this and let's say, Woodland Hills isn't, how do we make sure also that this doesn't get out of control, in the sense of, this becomes kind of the beacon of hope for anyone within 50 miles of, hey, if you want a place to stay, hot meal, or, kind of that kind of a concept, that's the place where you go. And then all of a sudden we become a magnet community for that. So how do we answer with compassion without letting this kind of get out of control?
It's a great question. And, part of the way you make it not a magnet is that it is not, nobody can just walk up to the cabin community and get a room, or they can't use the showers, and they're not going to have access to the services, because this is meant to be a residential area where you have people live. These are what I mean is that these people, this is their residence. This is where they are living. This is not meant to be a navigation center. We need navigation centers, and I want to get one as soon as possible in the district. We have one close by in Van Nuys, but we want more of those. But this one is not meant to be that. Similarly, I'm trying to get something passed where we have a buffer zone around all of these, where there would be just encampments are just strictly prohibited. But what we found is in these, and Ken and Lori can speak to this, but in areas like this that are not dense with homeless, like in Venice and other areas, they tend not to become that magnet. But I'm going to let Ken and Lori speak to that, because I've heard that concern from a lot of folks, and I don't want us to be creating a magnet. I want us to be creating a facility that is going to be helping people transition.
Yeah, and I would just say, with the various shelter sites that we operate, so let's just start with Pacoima. There's nobody lining up to get services outside of that facility. Raymer Street, nobody lining up. Van Nuys, there's nobody coming and creating pockets of new homeless to access services. And the very reason why is, like the councilman said, they're not going to get anything. So people tend to go to places that they can access or get some kind of services. And not to mention, with the security level that we have on site, with the number of monitors that we have on site that are constantly, making sure that rules are being followed, people are abiding by, the rules that we've set forward. Everything is very orderly. I have given more tours than I can begin to tell you of the various shelter sites, but especially like the cabin communities that we've had the privilege of opening. The first one, and now getting ready to open the second one, then we'll open the third one in Reseda. When I bring people like to Chandler, and they're like, it's so quiet here. And I go, yeah, it is quiet here. And there's this expectation that, oh my gosh, it must be like a homeless encampment. And there's got to be a lot of, no, it's not. It's very quiet. It's very orderly. People are going about their business, and it really is a great solution. So I think oftentimes, it's the fears, it's that false evidence appearing real. We just don't know, and we're afraid it's going to get out of control. And that has not been the case at any of the sites, and there's no reason that I would expect that to take place in Tarzana or Reseda.
Okay, next we'll have one of the written questions. Veronica,
Yes.
could you read?
Next question comes from Suzanne Lynn. Will the Judge Carter injunction regarding Skid Row mean that a bunch of Skid Row people get sent to the valley?
No, I don't believe that to be the case. The Judge Carter injunction is still, it's going to be appealed and everything else, but he has basically said that we have to immediately deal with Skid Row, and starting with getting the women and children into shelter, and then within 90 days, and then within another period of time, basically depopulating and finding services for all of those folks. The folks in the surrounding districts are concerned about, as that happens, that there will be more of those folks will end up in their districts, which I don't know that will happen, but it's certainly more likely than folks coming all the way out to the West Valley as they're offered shelter and other things locally. If they don't want to take it and they move elsewhere, they're probably not going to move all the way out to the West San Fernando Valley, but they're not being shipped here, or I know I've heard all of these concerns, but that's not what's happening. Ken or Lori, do you want to add to that?
I would just say the same thing, that as far as I understand the order to be, There are no plans. It's focused on Skid Row, and there are no plans to have people come from Skid Row all the way out to the valley. And in reality, those folks probably don't want to come to the San Fernando Valley. What we find is that people experiencing homelessness in a certain area kind of want to be in that area. When we've had housing opportunities in even in different parts of the San Fernando Valley, if somebody's from the Reseda area, say, they tend to kind of want to stay close to maybe their, family members or their own community, what they know, and so I don't foresee that happening at all.
Okay. Next, we'll go to Marvin Chowdhury. Marvin, how are you doing? Welcome.
Hi. Yeah, this is Marvin Chaudhary, Vice President of the Racine Neighborhood Council and ex-intern for your office. I want to start by commending you and your team and the Hope of the Valley for creating these tiny homes. They obviously aren't a replacement for permanent supportive housing, but they're definitely a step in the right direction. I have two questions. My first being that there is an issue with these special enforcement zones around the cabin communities and the sweeps in general. And I understand that the idea of these sweeps is to clean the debris, the feces, the trash in the area around these encampments to make it more livable and hygienic. But we've heard counts from unhoused folks that these sweeps are often involving police brutality, whether they're given something like 2 minutes to collect their belongings, and anything that they can't collect is thrown away, like identifying documents. We've heard counts of people not giving adequate notice, being given adequate notice for these sweeps, like in what happened in Echo Park. And we've seen people just completely displaced by these sweeps when this isn't the actual intent of these cleanings. So what are we doing to make these sweeps work properly and eventually end them altogether? And my second question is that you mentioned that the LA County Department of Public Health controls our mental health resources for the unhoused, but there's a motion in City Council to create a public health department for our city. So what are your thoughts on this? Wouldn't our resource allocation be better if the City Council and Mayor had control of our own public health department and our own mental health resources? Thank you.
Yes, so a number of questions, and I'll try to unpack them all, and if I can remember them all. So thank you for them. I don't like the word sweeps because I don't ever want to see somebody swept. That's the implication. But in terms of the special enforcement zones, are going back to what's called Care Plus cleanups. You're right. Nobody should be given just 5 minutes, 10 minutes notice to get all their belongings. They're supposed to be given notice in advance. In fact, in my district, with this, I take that so seriously that I've been going out with my team personally on the weekends prior to a Care Plus cleanup and talking to the unhoused people to make sure that people have notice, and to say, do you know this is coming? And even with that, folks are gonna, it's gonna be, sometimes difficult when, even if you've had 72 hours notice or a week's notice, when sanitation comes and you have to move temporarily to get the street cleaned, it's going to be difficult. We're talking in council, and we just passed, or it was at least the first step of trying to spell out some of the protocols better. There was a Care Plus motion that Mr. Bonin and Ms. Rahman put forward that was amended in committee that just came forward to council to try to spell out those protocols even more clearly, because it's not just about the zones right around Bridge Homes. As you know, the whole city, once we get to a certain tier in COVID, will be again subject to Care Plus cleanings. And Care Plus cleaning is supposed to be about enhanced hygiene services, including showers, COVID testing, and deep cleaning of the sidewalks to prevent disease, to keep the encampments from getting way out of control in terms of size and debris. The city doesn't have a lot of ways to do that. And the Care Plus cleanup right now is one of the few ways that we have. But in terms of the police brutality stuff, I mean, I'm all for making sure that, I don't even think police need to be involved in Care Plus cleanups. They're not supposed to be unless called by sanitation as a backup because there is a problem. What was the other part of your question? It was Are you still on the line? There was a second part of it. You remember, Ken or Lori, what the second part was?
Oh, I can talk again. Someone unmuted me. It was about the Department of Public Health. So we have
Oh,
our
got it.
Department of
Got
Public
it.
Health. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Sorry, I forgot for a second. So it's interesting. The idea of a Department of Public Health came up a couple of years ago. And it was Michael Weinstein had done it as part of a lawsuit. And at that time, I thought, this doesn't make any sense. Why reinvent the wheel? The county does our health. But frankly, after living through COVID and the frustrations that we have with homelessness, I have become much more open, in fact, eager to try to create a health department of our own in the city of Los Angeles, because one of the biggest frustrations is that folks on the street aren't getting the help that they need when it comes to mental health and drug addiction. I know I go out there regularly with outreach workers, both LASA workers and Pastor Huck, and with other folks, and I come across a lot of people who are in desperate need of mental health or drug addiction. And some of them say to me right then, hey, if you could get me into a program, I would go. And we immediately call the County Department of Mental Health to try to get them out there. And it's not easy. We've been able to get them out a few times, but it's not easy. And part of that is because they cover such a large area. And the beauty of having these cabin communities and other things is that you can send those workers to the site and they can see many clients at one time. But part of the frustration is that the county is too big and they're not responsive to our needs as a city. So I'm very open and eager to and support the idea. And we already put a motion forward that I supported to support the idea of what would it take to change that and to have the city take this on and to get some of that money. Right now it's done by the county, but there's a lot of money that flows through the state and the feds to the county to do those services. It's also been one of the issues in the lawsuit with the judge that I mentioned earlier. One of the big breakthroughs with that lawsuit was when we were able to come up with a roadmap to create a lot of these interventions, and through the judge, we were able to get the county to commit the services to each of these interventions. So I guess the answer is yes. I'm very open to the idea of LA getting its own, creating its own department, but that will be a radical change, and it'll take some work, and we'll have to change the way the money flows, but hopefully it will create more responsiveness to those issues, because that is a frustration. People look to the city for the answers, and we feel that responsibility, but we don't have that authority when it comes to mental health and drug addiction. Okay, I think we go now to a written question, is that right? Veronica, if you could read the next question.
Sure. If we could perhaps address a series of operating questions that should have relatively short answers.
Okay.
First one is, will there be COVID testing on site?
Yes, there will be COVID testing on site. The Department of Health Services comes out regularly to test. Actually, we now have a way to have folks self-administer tests with the guidance of our staff that'll be on site. And then we also are able to offer vaccinations to those residents who would like to be vaccinated.
A second question, will smoking be allowed on site?
Smoking will be allowed on site inside the property in a designated smoking area only. There will be no smoking inside the actual cabins.
In addition, will there be a curfew, and how many security guards will be on site?
Yes, we will have a curfew. It is 10 o'clock p.m. and we are planning to have 3 security guards at this location. Somebody who will be stationed at the front, someone will be inside the property, and then we will have somebody who will kind of monitor the outside of the property as well.
Finally, will the shelter be accommodating families?
Will it be, I'm sorry, accommodating?
Families.
Families, no. This location is for individuals only. We can take couples in a cabin as long as they are adults 18 years and older.
Thank you. We can move on to another question.
Okay, the next question comes from Greg Pidfigerding, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that.
Yes, hello. Thank you. Yep, it's Pittsburgh Gurney. I do have a question. I'd like to also hear from Ken and Lori on this as well. It's regarding, the high cost of housing in LA County, which is obviously one of the big challenges we have with the homeless population. But one thing that's not being discussed at all is because we kind of have to have everything on the table. Why is the city or county not trying to be creative when it comes to short-term rentals? And how much of a problem has that really impacted? Because it sees from a timing standpoint of when home prices have really started to skyrocket and the lack of availability of inventory for homes for people, really short-term rentals are completely competing against a strategy to try and house more people at a lower cost. So I'm just trying to see why that topic never comes up about putting some kind of moratorium on short-term rentals to open up the inventory, especially with larger corporate holdings of large, vast properties.
It's a great question, and it does come up. It was very much a part of the debate on short-term rentals, and it was actually one of the points that I made over and over and over again when I was insisting that we need to better regulate our short-term rentals, because you're right, there were corporations buying up apartments and kicking people out and basically renting short-term to folks. There were folks who would normally have a tenant who were instead having a short-term rental. So we changed the short, and there was very little the city could do about it, because short-term rentals were actually not legal in the city of Los Angeles, but they would happen because it was so difficult to regulate. So we put forward regulations to regulate the short-term rental industry, and most importantly, limited it to your primary residence. And that's important because that prevents the corporations from buying up units and and putting all those units, putting people out and putting those units up for sale. We also limited it so that you couldn't short-term rent or RSO, a rent stabilized unit, for that same very reason, because it was just too, the profit motive was too strong to deny people actual housing. And what was good about bringing that into regulation was that we then could hold the Airbnbs of the world accountable, because if someone put that unit on the market, we required that we finally had a connection to the units and the people by requiring Airbnb to have a unique identifying number with every listing that they put, so that as soon as we identify someone who is putting that unit up who is not the primary resident, then that we can force Airbnb at substantial penalty if they don't comply to take that unit off the market. Now, there's still issues with enforcement on that, and that is something that's an ongoing issue. This is a real-time issue, but you're absolutely right, and it was one of my rallying cries to make sure that we better regulated, and that we actually regulated short-term rentals, because I do think that it contributed to an increase in people losing their apartments and to homelessness. So the good news is that we now have better regulations on the books. The bad news is there's still some loopholes out there. The reason why there's not a just straight out moratorium on all short-term rentals is then it would push it back to where it was, which is sort of the black market. And B, there are a lot of folks who relied on short-term rentals to prevent themselves from being homeless. So, if you're a widow or something and you're renting out a room in your house, well, the thought is you should be able to do that to help make ends meet, or you have, while your child's at school, you want to rent those rooms for a short period of time. So this was the compromise that was reached in LA, which I think is one of the stronger, when you look around the country at the different short-term rental regulations, we have some of the strongest ones. But it's a great point that you made. Okay, next we have Dave Avria.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi, good evening, and thank you very much for taking it. As a business owner, literally across from this community, I'm right there. And I see this construction on a daily basis in the last couple of months, suffering this whole noise, beeping of this equipment moving and everything. And I really want to see these homeless people going and move into this place. However, the street have very limited amount of parking. We don't know, we've been suffering for years from homelesses that been parking on this street with RV, a lot of drugs on the street. I understood that you guys do not allow to smoke, to allow these people to smoke on site, or they have a designated area to smoke. And I'm really concerned about all the drug issue and the parking on the street, as our employees already with this construction don't have room to park between school, Discovery School around, between the rest of the businesses. As you guys know, about 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago, the building burned almost to nothing next door to me. And it's going to be about almost 20,000 square feet coming up right now with a lot of employees. What's going on with that? So it's two part of my question is, one, it's about all the parking, and two, it's regarding all the drugs that we suffer for years, and hopefully it will not come back again.
Ken and Laura, do you want to address?
Well, I would, the parking situation, I'd have to look at the plans again to see, is there any designated parking, for staff? Usually within a tiny home or a cabin community, the numbers of people that actually have vehicles and drive is usually, I'd say, maybe 3 or 4 out of 100. And so it is very, very small percentage that would even have a car when they come in. So we tend to be more concerned about our staff being able to park. But other places, what we've done is we've issued placards that verify that someone is an employee of Hope of the Valley so that they could park at a certain place. But I would say this, we want great relationship with our neighbors. And, to the point that I'll give out my cell phone to you. And if you see anything, also there will be a direct line to the site that'll be right across the street from you, that if you see anything, if you hear anything, that you can immediately call and we can address issues. Again, the people that are staying in these communities are ones that actually want to change their life. They typically do not tend to be the troublemakers. The ones that don't want any rules, that don't want to listen to anybody, that refuse to come in, they're the ones that typically cause the problems. And so we just want to make sure that we're not, painting with a broad brush and saying, all those problems are caused by, people staying in the cabin community, when in reality they may not be. But nevertheless, we want to make sure we have a great line of communication with you, because the success and prosperity of your business means very much to us.
Yeah, and I just want to add, when it comes to the question regarding the drugs, we have a good neighbor policy that we will go over with each of the residents that moves into the cabin community. And part of that good neighbor policy includes not using drugs, drinking alcohol, and things of that nature at all in the local community. We really work with our participants on that and helping them understand how important that is to Hope of the Valley as an agency, but for them. We talk to our residents and let them know we want this program to succeed for you. And as such, we need you to help us out, and we all need to work together. We all need to work together to make this successful. So we will have those conversations with each resident who comes in.
And it's interesting, you mentioned, the situation that's already there with the drugs and people at that area. Well, again, the idea is to get those folks who are currently not supervised, who are not in a program, who are living in the area, to get them into something that's organized where they can actually be supervised and they can be on a road to moving forward with their lives. All right, so we don't have a lot of time, but we'll do another written question, and then maybe we can get 1 or 2 more oral questions.
Sure. Last written question. This was pre-submitted by Jessica Dane. What are we doing about the homeless people who are mentally ill and or on drugs that refuse to accept help?
So for that, we do our best to connect them to outreach. They may already be connected, but I mean, I know that if we're aware of it, we would continue to try to connect people to those outreach teams. As I mentioned, DMH has a wonderful, it's called the Home Team. You know, we have a good relationship with that team and they're very responsive. You know, they do their best to connect with people that are struggling with mental health and are on the streets to work with them and get them connected. So that's what we would that's what we would do. And then of course, as I mentioned, lahop.org is also available for anybody to make an outreach request through the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority.
Okay, so let's go now to Sunita.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good evening, everybody. I just had a couple of questions. One of them is looking at the current spate of shootings we have seen across the country. Will there be background checks for these people to see if there is any past history of violence or other mental health concerns before letting them use get the house? And what about, you talked about curfew. What happens after 10 o'clock? They don't come in. What happens to them? They get locked out of their cabins?
That's a really good question. Both good questions. So we don't necessarily run a background check. We do run everyone through, as I mentioned, the Megan's Law website. But we do have the security team go through the bags thoroughly to make sure that there are no weapons of any kind coming into the site. And then everybody is wanded as well. So we do have that, you know, kind of precaution in place. Regarding the curfew, if somebody doesn't adhere to the curfew, we would work with them. We'd give them a couple warnings on that, put them on an improvement plan, et cetera, et cetera. We really don't want people, we don't want to lock people out of their cabin. You know, if they're a little bit late, you know, because then they're going to be outside their cabin for the night. So we're going to work with folks again. You know, we really are finding over at Chandler that people are adhering to the guidelines. It really has not been a major issue. People not, you know, coming in when they're supposed to. For us, it's about having these conversations, having clear communication with the residents. Because as has been mentioned multiple times tonight, the folks that are in the cabin community want to be there, they want help. And so they tend to be willing to cooperate and follow the guidelines so that the program is successful, and more than anything, so that they can make their way to permanent housing. This is not their forever home.
Great. Okay, we'll looking at the time, and I promised folks that it would only be 2 hours, and we're almost at that mark. We'll have one more question, and then we can give a chance for Ken and Lori to make some closing comments. And I also say that we're going to make sure that we try to answer, as we always do, anyone, if you haven't been able to get your questions answered here today, we're happy to provide written answers. This is a continuous dialogue and conversation. But let's go to the last question, and I believe the next person on the queue is Leonard Schaefer.
Unmute myself. Yes, no question. I just wanted to state something. Maybe I'm glad I'm near the end. In my former profession, I dealt with homeless in the Valley long before it was as severe as it is today. And I want to commend the three of you and the others working for giving them two simple things that a lot of us don't think about, and a lot of people here probably don't think about. One is a lockable door. The other is a 24-hour use of bathrooms. So thank you.
Thank you, Len. All right, so again, promised folks that we'd be done within 2 hours, and I like to try to stick to that. So Ken and Lori, would you like to have a few minutes to make any closing statements, and I'll make a closing comment, and that'll be the night. So go ahead.
I'll jump in first. I was reading some of the questions in the Q&A, and I saw a number of people said, you know, we want to help. And that's always good to hear, because it really does take a community. It takes a village, it takes all of us. And one of the things that we've really tried to do at Hope of the Valley is to partner with the local community. And there's several ways that you can partner with Hope of the Valley. One simple way is we do have 5 thrift stores, and our 5 thrift stores, the funds that are generated from the sale of donations, 100% of it goes back into homeless services. And so that's a great way. And we'll actually come do pickups. You know, we have trucks that are on the road, and also it allows us to employ people that have been homeless or coming out of homelessness. All the truck drivers have been through our recovery program. That's a great way that people can help. Also, once we get past COVID and the Department of Public Health allows us to have more volunteers, we love for the community to come, and we have a sign up list, and you can come help serve the meal. You can even, you know, come and offer to teach classes, and everything's on an opt-in basis. And so we want that type of engagement. There's things probably that you know that you can be a great resource to somebody else. And so please know that that we actually want your participation in this. You can also just go to hopeofthevalley.org and learn more about who we are as an organization and what we're trying to accomplish. And we really thrive on the partnerships that we can have together with the local community. Just one example, when, you know, because we were opening up the site on Tuesday now of Alexandria, we needed sheets, blankets, pillows, we needed all kinds of supplies. We put a wish list out on Amazon, and the local community responded in a heroic fashion and got everything that we needed. And so I just want to say, and many of you probably may have participated in that, I just want to say thank you, because it does take all of us working together. And thanks for caring enough to jump on this town hall meeting to learn, to listen, to participate in what we hope to be a great solution to homelessness in the West Valley.
And I'll just end by saying I did see a question in the chat as well about our finances at our agency. We are a 501c3. Our I-90 is public information. We try to be a very transparent agency. And then I also will add that we really do want to be good neighbors. And I also appreciate your questions. I hope that we were able to answer some of them. I hope that some of the fears and the anxieties and uncertainty will, you know, you'll feel better once the cabin community is opened, or both of them are opened, and we're up and running. You know, Ken mentioned giving out his cell. You can have mine as well. This is a labor of love for both of us. We are committed to the people that we serve, but we are also committed to the communities in which our shelters operate. So thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you for asking some really great questions.
Great, thank you. And Ken and Lori, I especially thank you for taking the time, obviously also for the work and the dedication that you put in, but taking the time to speak with my constituents today. I really very much appreciate that. And to everyone, I know my team has been trying to answer your questions in the Q&A if we haven't gotten to them here. Please know also you can call my office with any questions. I'm always happy to meet with people individually and in groups. We do that all the time. On these cabin communities, I've had more than 50 meetings and discussions with people, as well as having the cabin committees going up. We will rebroadcast this this town hall. The link will be, once we get it up and running, will be on my website, and we'll also push it out through social media, etc. So folks can do that. If people want to email me, it's councilmember.blumenfield that's BLUMENFIELD @lacity.org. While we're going to end the meeting, you know, exactly at 8 o'clock, like we said, I'm going to leave the webinar on for a few minutes. If people have other questions, and my team's going to try to answer those questions as we go. But again, this isn't the end of the discussion. This is really just part of the discussion. It's been ongoing, and it will be ongoing even after there are residents in those cabins. I want to continue the conversation so that everybody feels comfortable, that we're able to address concerns, answer questions, and make a difference in people's lives. This is, again, it's easy to sit around and do nothing or wait for the perfect opportunity or the perfect intervention. Nothing's perfect, but we're moving forward on everything that we possibly can because this is a crisis. So again, it is now exactly 8 o'clock. We've been together for 2 hours, and I appreciate all of you who have stuck it out to the end. And I hope this has been useful, and I look forward to the continued dialogue. Thank you very much. Again, we're gonna sign off, but we're gonna leave the webinar on for a few minutes to make sure we get all the Q&A that's out there. And also, I think I mentioned anybody who pre-submitted a Q&A, we have those answers in writing on my website as well. So thank you and good night.